looking at the seven judgment of God. We're looking at the last one now, and that's the Great White Throne Judgment. The subjects of this judgment are the lost and the wicked dead of all ages, and no believers are there being judged. Look at Revelation chapter 20, verses 11 through 15 for information on the subjects. And the time of this judgment, it takes place shortly after the millennium, but before the eternal state of the new heavens and the new earth that we're told about in Revelation chapter 20, verses 10 through 11, and Revelation chapter 21, verse 1. And where is it? It's before the great white throne, according to Revelation chapter 20, verse 11. And the result of this is those not found written in the book of life will be cast into a lake of fire. And that's in Revelation chapter 20, verse 15. The believers have already been resurrected and taken to heaven. That's when they were called up at the rapture. So it is now the dead, the unsaved, that stand before the great white throne. God has already removed Satan and his angels, according to Revelation chapter 20, verse 10. Then the unbelieving dead are resurrected to stand before the throne in Revelation chapter 20, verses 12 through 13. The unbelieving dead did not accept Christ's payment for their sins, and so now must be judged by their works. There will be many who did good works and claimed they should get into heaven because of their works in Matthew chapter 7, verse 21. We also see that in that verse, they will claim that they should be able to enter into heaven, but Christ will not allow them to enter. And that's in and then in Matthew chapter 7, verse 22, we see that they claimed good works to get into heaven. Good works, I have to tell you again, do not get us into heaven. Only faith in Jesus Christ. And we see that in Ephesians chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, and it tells us that we are saved by grace through faith and not by works. But if we're saved, we're created unto good works. Jesus paid the price for our sins by being judged for our sins. His righteousness is imputed to each one that accepts Christ. But those who do not accept Christ have only their works, and so when they will be judged, since they only have their works, they're going to be judged out of the books of their works. And if they have violated even one commandment, they will be cast into a lake of fire. And Revelations chapter 20, verses 12 through 15 explains that. And there's no mention of even one person at this judgment having their name written in the book of life. Therefore, they will be judged according to how their works stand up to the 10 commandments. If they have violated even one of these commandments, they are guilty of violating them all. Look at James chapter 2, verse 10. How many of all mankind have sinned? All mankind have sinned, we are told in Romans chapter 3, verse 23. So what is the penalty for violating one of these commandments? Romans chapter 6:23 says the wages of sin is death. And the death mentioned here is the second death, which is eternal separation from God in the lake of fire. And you'll find that in Revelation 21, verse 8, and John chapter 3, verse 18. Death comes first, and then the judgment, according to Hebrews chapter 9, verse 27. So since the eternal destiny is fixed at death, the great white throne judgment is also for degrees of punishment. In Luke chapter 12, verses 47 through 48, Jesus tells us that no one knew God's will and did not do it. Or rather, let me say that over. The ones that knew God's will and did not do it shall be beaten with many stripes. On the other hand, those who did know God's will and did not do it shall be beaten with a few stripes, thus indicating that there are degrees of punishment. We also see in Luke chapter 20, verses 46 through 47, that the scribes mentioned there would receive a greater condemnation, indicating there are also degrees of punishment. Degrees of punishment can be seen in Matthew chapter 11, verses 22 through 24, where Jesus tells the city of Chorazin and Bethsaida that it would be more tolerable on the day of judgment for Tyre and Sidon than for them. On down in verse 24, we see Jesus speaking of those in Capernaum, saying that in the day of judgment, it would be more tolerable for the land of Sodom. Degrees of punishment are shown in many other places throughout the Bible. At this final judgment, no one will be able to say that God did not treat them fairly. All mankind will be able to see that God gave everyone a chance, and each of us made our own decisions as to our eternal destiny. You see that in Romans 3:19 and in Colossians chapter 3, verses 22 through 25. Again, thank you for listening.